In today's lesson, I'm going to go over how we are going to auto-underwrite an email blast 100 plus cash and subject to offers from using the Jericho software. And so if you are a wholesaler or an investor or someone looking to leave their 9-to-5 job or be more efficient with their investments, I highly suggest that you watch today's lesson, as today's video is going to be dedicated to those inside my community. And so we're going to do a live demonstration, complete step-by-step walkthrough of how we are going to extract our leads from PropStream, auto-underwrite 100 plus cash and subject to offers, and then email blast these offers to the listing agent or to the seller. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to have an idea of what our buy box criteria is going to be, whether we're wholesaling the property or we're doing some kind of investment. Now, I do a lot of wholesaling and a lot of investment over in the state of Georgia. So anytime I'm using PropStream or batch leads, I'm always looking at the county. I'm never looking at city or town. I'm always targeting the county specifically, because when we go into our PropStream settings, which you will see shortly, the filtration that's provided from us from PropStream works a lot better when the circumference area that we're trying to target is based off of a county setting and not a city or a town. Because if we do this based off of city or town, then we are restricting the circumference of where properties would fit our criteria for some kind of flip for cash or a good creative finance transaction. So we want to maximize our circumference area for where we are targeting our properties. That's why we're going to be using the county of that state that we are targeting. We're going to start off in Barrow County. We're going to work our way down to Clayton. So I'm going to move this over to my secondary screen. And then let's pull up PropStream. Okay, so now we're in PropStream. So the moment that you get inside of PropStream, we're going to start filtering our data set. Whether we're working on market or off market does not matter. We're going to start this by step by step. So we're going to start with our first county of interest. So I'm going to start with Barrow County, Georgia, since that is the county that I want to start working off of. So let's wait for this to load. And it just auto-populated. So now we have a huge list of properties. We have 37,000 properties here. We need to start filtering this out. Since we are going to be targeting subject to properties, we need to go into our filter setting here, and we need to start characterizing the settings that we want to be looking for. So follow along with me. So anytime we're doing any type of wholesaling transaction or even a investor transaction where we're taking down the property ourselves, it's highly beneficial that we stick with some basic characteristics of the property that are going to maximize our return on investment, which would include having the number of bedrooms and bath as a standard 3-2. So let's do that. So we're going to set the bedrooms to 3. We're going to set the bathrooms to 2. Let's put a minimum square footage of 1,000 square feet. The year built, I want to stay at 1970. Since we are in the year 2025, I really don't want to be working off of properties that are greater than 50 years old when we have a subject to transaction that we are trying to target. The reason being is that the older the property, the greater likelihood that I, as the investor, now have to come into that property and do some kind of refurbishment, do some sort of repairs. And because the property already has low equity to begin with, we are not going to spend all of that money on the rehab, knowing that the property is already in a low equity situation to begin with. So we really want to be targeting properties on the MLS or off the MLS that have little to no repairs needed when doing a subject to transaction that has low equity. The school district doesn't matter. Number of units doesn't matter. We don't want to over-filter our settings in PropStream. It's a bad idea that you do that, as the algorithm that's running in PropStream tends to work more efficiently when we keep our settings at a very standard manner. Property intelligence, we can skip that. Foreclosure, we can skip that. Now I'm going to be targeting the MLS. I talk with agents all the time. I prefer to work with agents, and I prefer to work on properties on the MLS as opposed to off market. The reason being, personally, that I like to work with the MLS is because I know that when I do a transaction with an agent, it's going to be a reoccurring business cycle. It's not going to be a one-time deal, meaning that if I were to target properties that were off market, in all greater likelihood, that seller is only going to have one property, their primary residence. And if they happen to have two or three properties, well, that's probably going to be 1% of the residential owners. And so I'd much rather do reoccurring business with the same listing agent, maybe 5, 7, 10 times out of the year, as opposed to just doing one transaction with the seller. Nothing wrong with targeting off market, but my personal business model is to always be working with listing agents and build connections with them. So I'm going to set my MLS to on market to yes. I'm going to keep the listing type as any. The reason being is even if the property is listed for rent, it's 100% okay, because you're going to see that when we're going to be filtering our data in the leads import section of the Jericho, the properties that are for rent, I'm going to save these properties for last, and I'm going to do a follow-up email campaign with that listing agent. And the reason why I'm going to do a follow-up email campaign with that listing agent is even though the property is listed for rent, there is a high probability that the seller, sorry, not the seller, the homeowner of that property might not actually want to keep that property anymore. Maybe they're feeling obligated to rent it out. And for those reasons, we're still going to contact that listing agent that has that property for rent. And we're going to kindly ask if the seller has a change of mindset and would prefer to actually sell the property as opposed to renting it out. So you'll see that shortly. For the MLS status, I am going to select all. I think everything here is fine. We're going to keep this setting as a select all. If anything is a failed listing, a sold listing, a removed listing, or even a deleted listing, anything that is not actively on the MLS, instead of creating an LOI for that property, we're going to do a follow-up email campaign with that listing agent, and we're going to kindly ask them, do you have a property that would make a good candidate for cash for a fix and flip, or do you have a good property that would make a good candidate for creative finance, such as a subject to, seller finance, hybrids. In today's lesson, we're going to be focusing in on our subject twos. But when we're doing our email campaign with the listing agent, we definitely want to keep that creative finance category open-ended and allow that agent to give us that type of feedback and allow them to regurgitate to us whether or not they actually do have a listing that would make a good candidate for some sort of creative finance. So even if the MLS status is removed, deleted, canceled, or expired, which we will see when we export our data set, we're still going to reach out to them. Now for the MLS status date, since right now, as of the recording of this video, we are in May 21, normally the listing agent has a contract with the seller for between 5 and 6 months. Now, if that is to be standard across all brokerages, then we want to be looking at the MLS date of when that listing was active, meaning that I want to go back to January 1st of 2025, but I don't want to go further back than this. So this is going to be my default minimum status date. Anything behind this, which would be December 30, December 31 of 2024, there's a greater likelihood of that listing being completely inactive, 100%. And so you can see here on the right-hand side that our property list, which was massive, is now cut down to 308 properties. And that was by simply changing the active status date. And we're going to set this as January 1st. So whatever month you're currently in at this moment in time, just go back 5 or 6 months on the PropStream filtration here and use that as your default benchmark. We're going to keep the days on market blank, as this MLS status date works a lot more efficiently within the algorithm of PropStream. The MLS listing amount, I really don't care what the property is listed at. I will tell you though that properties that are under $500,000 on the MLS are probably going to have a greater cash on cash return, are more than likely going to be a better investment opportunity for you as a wholesaler or as the investor. Anything above $500,000 is going to be case by case scenario, property by property, and you shouldn't rule them out, because there is a possibility that you can acquire $1 million property via subject to transaction and you only need to bring maybe $100,000 to the closing table. And so if that is the case and the property is in great condition and it's in a great neighborhood, that might be a worthwhile investment for the wholesaler or the investor to take a look at. So we're not going to put any type of cap on the MLS listing amount. Just be aware that most investors are going to be wanting to stay at $500,000 or less for any type of buy and hold or even fix and flips. So let's keep moving forward. Pre-foreclosure and bank owned, we're going to skip this. Owner information and occupancy both can stay as any for vacant or owner occupied. Doesn't matter if the seller is in or out of the state at this moment in time. The years of ownership. Now, this is very important. Since we're targeting properties that are going to be subject to related and the property is going to be having low equity to begin with, there's going to be a greater likelihood of that property having low equity when it hasn't had enough time to appreciate year over year. So, how do we filter for that? Well, we're going to set a max here for the years of ownership. So, I'm going to put a max here for 5 because I don't want to over filter. But the reality is, most subject to candidates are probably going to have a year of ownership of maybe 2, maximum 3 years of residential ownership, as that's probably going to be the reason why that property has very little equity and that the seller is going to be more open-minded to a subject to transaction. But according to the PropStream filtration here, we're going to set a cap here at 5 because if we over filter, then we're going to be losing some of this data set here that you can see here on the right hand side. So I don't want to over filter. When we import this into the Jericho software, that is then where we will take a closer look at the equity of the property, and we will decide manually and through a auto calculation through the Jericho software whether or not that property is going to be a good target for a subject to LOI, which you will also see shortly. So let's go into the owner type now. Now for the owner type, I want to be looking at residential ownership. I don't want to be working with LLCs, trusts, anything like that. I want the deed of the property to be under the seller's name. If the deed of the property is under an LLC or a trust or a mix of both, then that tells me I'm working with an investor. I don't want to be working with investors. I want to be working directly with sellers or with the listing agent who's representing the seller. So we're going to keep this as an individual owner type. Absentee owner location, keep it the way it is. Let's see, last sales price, last sales date. We don't need any of this. Let's move on down. Lien, bankruptcy, divorce, keep it as any. Now for the estimated value and equity. Now this is going to be important. We need to filter out these seller finance portions of these properties. So how we're going to filter out these seller finance properties here, which basically means that the property is free and clear, is I want to put a cap on the estimated equity that the property has. So here under estimated equity, we're going to put a maximum cap. Let's see, it looks like we have an option here for 90%. So that works just fine. So what that basically means is that anything that is 91% in equity or greater is going to be removed from this list here, and it's basically going to give me a greater likelihood that the property has a lien associated with the property, and that lien will then translate to a possible subject to transaction, depending on the interest rate, depending on the encumbrance amount. There's going to be other factors involved. But the reason why we're doing the estimated equity percentage here and the reason why we're putting a cap at 90% is because I don't want to be looking at properties on this list that have 100% equity. Because if that happens, then the property is free and clear and is not going to be subject to transaction. It's only going to be a seller finance transaction or a cash offer, whichever one the seller decides to choose from. So let's keep moving down. Mortgage info. Now I'm going to put a cap here for one loan. Now, if you want to put more than one loan or more than one lien on the property as a cap here for the mortgage info, you can. Just be aware that there's going to be a greater likelihood of that property cash flowing if there's only one lien associated with the property. So if there is more than one lien on that property, then it might not cash flow all that well. And when the seller comes back to you and says, you know what, we're actually interested in this subject to transaction, we're ready to move forward. During the final underwriting phase, you need to request kindly from the seller or from the listing agent a recent copy of their mortgage statement. You need to verify all of the liens associated on that property because PropStream might show you only one lien, but the seller might have an HOA lien or some sort of construction lien or something that is hidden, and you need to be aware of that because that's going to be accounted for when you are doing your final underwriting with the seller. So for PropStream and for the PropStream settings, just put the number of open mortgages at a cap of 1, and that will be totally fine. So the loan type is important. We want to keep conventional loans, FHA loans, VA loans, other, unknown, and credit lines. These three here where it says reverse mortgage, commercial, and construction, I recommend that you leave it unchecked and that you just focus on this section here for the loan types. Now, in terms of the maximum interest rate, I really don't care what the interest rate is for these properties because at the end of the day, we're trying to buy this property with as little cash as possible at closing. So even if the interest rate is at 7% or 6%, and if that property is able to cash flow at such a high interest rate, then that's going to be wonderful because when we decide to do a refinance on that property, we're going to cash flow even more. So I don't want to put any type of settings here on PropStream that we're putting some sort of minimum or max on the interest rate. We're going to leave it blank and we're just going to analyze our data set when we export it. And we're going to look at that data set within the Jericho software and we're going to start categorizing properties as a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 transaction. Meaning I want to be looking at properties that are going to be highly desirable for subject to, and then we might have properties that might make a decent subject to. And then we're going to run into a situation where the property is more than likely going to be a hybrid scenario. So there's going to be some equity at play, and because there's going to be some equity at play, then we're more than likely going to have a payment to the lender and a payment to the seller. So that's more than likely going to be our tier 3 transactions. In today's lesson, we're just going to focus on subject to transactions only. We'll do a separate lesson for hybrid transactions. Don't want to give you guys too much information all at once. But for the PropStream filter here, leave it blank. Don't over filter this setting. Too many wholesalers and investors are putting in random interest rates here. And then this list here under the unique properties is not going to auto-populate cleanly on your PC because you over filtered. So just leave this blank. For the interest rate type, this I'd recommend. So this is very important. For the interest rate type, I do want to look at fixed rates. I want to look at adjustable rates. The other or unknown is completely fine. The step interest rate is fine. The variable rate, I don't want to deal with. But now we run into a situation. You can see here on the right hand side that the unique properties is now indicating that we only have one property here for a subject to transaction. So this is what happens when you overfilter on PropStream. So it looks like even though these would be the most desirable settings here for PropStream, because I really want to look at that data set that would have a good list of subject to candidates, I'm just going to deselect all of this and we're going to keep our 79 properties here on this list, and then we'll just manually and quickly, because this won't take so much time, we'll quickly look over all these properties within the Jericho software, and we'll decide whether or not that these are properties that we really want to auto underwrite and send an LOI for. So now we have our settings here for our subject to. So notice that I really didn't over filter here. This is really basic information. Really the only thing that I'm looking at that's going to be in a direct translation to the subject to properties is that we're putting in a cap here for the estimated equity at 90%. I don't want to look at any seller finance properties. And it's okay if these properties are mixed in with hybrids. Totally fine. Maybe we'll do a separate lesson based off of that same data set for the hybrid transactions. But I don't want to put a cap here for 15% or 20% for subject to, because if you do that, you're going to over filter these settings from PropStream and you're going to be missing out on unique properties. So now let's just say view the 79 properties. We are in Barrow County. I'm going to select this list. I'm going to add this list. I'm going to create a new one. Once I create a new list, I'm going to save it as Barrow County, and let's put this in as a subject to. Sub 2. And let's capitalize the S. So now we have Barrow County sub 2 MLS. So now I'm going to click save. So this is my new list for our subject to properties. Okay. Now let's move into our next county here. So we just did Barrow County. I'm going to do 3 more. So we have Bartow, Carroll, and Cherokee County. So I'll minimize this and let's put in our next county. And I'm going to combine this data set within the Jericho because I want to maximize the potential for having a subject to transaction. So it looks like this list is actually in similar size to our first one, which is a little bit rare. That doesn't normally happen, but that's completely okay. So our filter settings are still here, which is great. So we don't need to enter in our filter settings again. So we'll exit out of there. Let's add a list. Let's create a new list. And I'm going to name this now as Bartow County. And it looks like I had a list name here that was similar in structure. Bartow County, sub 2, MLS. And I'm going to click on save. Now let's move into our next county, Carroll. So now we have Carroll County. We have 66 unique properties. I'm going to create a new list here in PropStream. I'm going to name it Carroll County, sub 2, MLS. Good. So now we have Cherokee County. Now Cherokee County is going to be my last county that I'm going to be targeting, at least in today's lesson. So I'm going to put that in here within the PropStream search bar, Cherokee County, Georgia. And we have a lot of properties here, so this is wonderful. So this is going to be a very good list. So we're going to now add this list, create a new one, put in Cherokee County. It's going to say MLS sub 2. And that is good enough. So this is going to be the CSV file name. Now once we click save, let's head on over to my properties within PropStream. And I can see here that my list is here. So I have Barrow, Bartow, Carroll, and Cherokee County. Now I'm going to click on one of these. And automatically we see that there are some default headers here. And these headers are basically going to be the filters that are used from PropStream when we start exporting our CSV data inside the Jericho software. So because we are going to be focused in on subject to, we need specific filtrations here to auto underwrite our subject to candidates. So let's go over the export settings here. So for the city, we can uncheck this. For state, we can uncheck this. For zip, we can also uncheck this. None of these 3 settings are needed for the auto underwrite feature within the Jericho. The only time that the zip code is going to be required is when we are doing a hybrid transaction or we're doing a seller finance transaction and we need to auto underwrite on the property. But this is not going to be required for the subject to. So actually, the filtration settings for the export feature here on PropStream is actually going to be very clean, and you're going to see that. We don't need the bedrooms, so we can uncheck that. Tax assessment information, don't need any of this. The total assessed value will be needed though for the hybrid and seller finance transactions, but we'll do a separate lesson in the future for those types of properties. The last and prior sale date, we don't need any of this. The open loan, now this we need. So I want to know the loan 1 rate. We've already pre-filtered on PropStream that we're only looking at properties with 1 lien and not 2 liens or 3 liens. So we don't need any of these settings here on the right hand side. So what we do need is the loan 1 balance and we need the loan 1 rate. So this is good to go. That's already checked off for us. The calculations here, we have an option here to look at the total open loans, which is basically going to verify to you when you are exporting your data that you really have 1 lien associated with that property when you did your pre-filtration. I'm going to uncheck this because I find 9 times out of 10 that PropStream does a decent job of really only exporting data that truly has the characteristics that you had predefined. So we don't need the total open loans because we already know that the predefined open loans that we were specifying was capped at 1. So I'm going to minimize this. Let's go into our MLS. Now we do need some information here, such as the MLS date. The MLS date is going to be the MLS listing date that the property went active by the brokerage or on the MLS itself. And so we need the status of the property, the date, the agent name, the MLS amount, their phone number, their email. All this information is required. So we'll keep that. Now for the lien, bankruptcy, and divorce, don't need any of this. Pre-foreclosure, don't need. Marketing, don't need either. So this looks very clean, which is fantastic. So I'm going to click on apply and save. And now this is basically going to be the categories and the information that we're going to be looking at when we export our CSV property data list within the Jericho software. So it looks like we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 categories for subject to. So this is a very clean list to do an auto underwrite and for an email blast. So now that this is created and our filtration has been set for the exportation, come over here to the top left. We're going to select all of these properties. We're going to go into our Actions tab, and we're going to click on Export CSV. So this is going to be for one of my counties that I'm going to be targeting, which is the Barrow County. I'm going to click on Close. Let's move into our next CSV dataset. Now, the settings that were used prior that we had predefined have automatically been applied to this new set of data, which is in the Bartow County. And so I don't need to go back in here into the right-hand side and look at the filters again because it's already been predefined for us. So what we need to do is just go into the Actions tab and click on Export CSV. And we're good to go here. Now let's do the other 2 counties. And let's apply the exact same method, Export CSV. And then lastly, Cherokee County, which I'm very excited for because this is a very nice data set. We have 283 properties here. That's going to make a potential candidate list for subject to and hybrid transactions. So let's go to the Actions tab, export the CSV file, and we're good to go. So PropStream is finished. So we don't need PropStream anymore. Now we're going to move into the Jericho software. We're going to import our data list. Once the data list is imported, we're going to analyze the data list to our liking. You're going to see how I filter it and how I analyze it. And then once that's done with, we'll throw that into the auto underwrite for the Jericho software. That'll take maybe about 5 minutes or so to do the auto underwrite for 100 plus properties. And then once the auto underwrite is done, then we'll move into the email blasting within the Jericho. And you'll see that the email blast is also done for you within minutes, and we'll be able to sit back and everything will be automated for us. So let's minimize out of here. Let's go into the Jericho now. Let's go into our leads import. And so we're now going to be importing more than one CSV file because I actually have 4 CSV files that we're going to be looking at for our data analysis. So before I do that, we need to make sure that the CSV files are within the correct folder file path. So for me, this is my folder file path. I have my exported properties folder on my desktop. And because the CSV files are going to be all in one location, what this macro is going to do, it's going to basically combine all the CSV files that are within that specified folder, combine it, and it's going to automatically import it here onto this spreadsheet within the Jericho. So let's do that. So you can see here on my screen now I have the exported properties folder path pulled up. And so these are going to be the CSV files that we're going to automate and import directly into the Jericho. I'm going to pull up one of these CSV files just for demonstration purposes. And this is basically what the data set's going to look like. And so we have the MLS amount, the date, the status of the listing, the loan one balance, the agent's name, and their email address. This is all we need for these subject to transactions. So now that I know all of my CSV files are all in the correct folder file path, I'm just going to simply click on this blue button here, which is going to import our CSV files within the Jericho software. Okay, so we can see that our entire CSV list was entirely imported within literally a couple seconds. So I'm just going to scroll down here, and we have a giant list of our exported CSV list that we had combined from PropStream. So this is super efficient, and it maximizes our return on time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this first row here, but I'm only going to delete from column A to column J. So I'm going to select these cells. I'm going to right click on my mouse. When I click the right clicker on the mouse, I'm going to click on delete. I'm going to select shift the cells up. That's basically going to move the data set one row up, and we want that because I want the column headers to be present in row 1. Very important. Now, column A is gracious enough to let us know which CSV file it had grabbed the data from. So right now you can see that we went from Bartow County to Carroll County, and now we're in Cherokee County. So we really don't need column A, so I'm actually going to delete column A. So let's delete column A as it's not necessary. And then let's take a further look. Looks like some of these headers are a little bit cut off. Let's left click on our Excel spreadsheet here, all the way at the top left. Double click on any of these columns where the mouse cursor now is starting to change its format. Double click anywhere, and you can see here that the spreadsheet will auto align, and all of the text within these cells will be greatly visible. So now let's just change the color of this ever so slightly for my eyes and for presentation purposes. Make this look nicer. And so now we have the loan one balance, loan one rate, the MLS amount, the agent's name, their email address. So what I'm going to do now is I need to start making sure that the format is correct for all of these cells. We're going to start doing some conditional formatting. And then once the conditional formatting is set, then we can do a filter here on the top header. And we can start categorizing properties that we want to target first. So let's start with column B, because column B is in a numerical format right now. We need to change that to a currency. And let's get rid of the decimal places. So now we're just looking at a currency format for the loan one balance. The loan one rate is also in a currency format. Don't want that. I want the loan one rate as a number format. And you can change the format of the text by simply selecting the Home tab on Excel Workbook, going to the center, and then you would select one of the drop downs here to change the formatting. So I can see that the loan one rate now is in a number format. The MLS date needs to be fixed. That needs to be in a short date format. So we fixed it here. MLS amount looks like it's in a correct format. Everything else looks good to go. Now we need to figure out the days on market for these properties. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a column here to the right hand side of the MLS date. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is Control semicolon. When I do that, it'll automatically populate today's date inside this cell, which is going to be Control semicolon. Now I'm going to click the equal sign here. I'm going to grab today's date. I'm going to subtract that from the MLS date, which is here in column E. I'm going to put in a $sign in the today's date, which happens to be in column F, row 1. And we're basically going to lock the first cell, and then we're going to subtract the cell here dynamically in column E. So when I click enter, it's going to give me the short date format. We don't want that. So what I'll do is I'll just change this to a number, and now we can see that the days on market is illustrated for us. Now the days on market is going to be an approximate estimate. This is not going to be the official days on market, as if you really want to find out what the actual days on market is, you need to visit the MLS listing itself, which is active. This is going to give us an approximate estimate, and we want the days on market as well because we want to have an idea if whether or not the property has been sitting on the MLS for a really long period of time. Plus, the auto underwrite feature here that you'll see shortly depends on the days on market because that's how our cash offer is going to be illustrated to the seller. So the days on market here, which is going to be a approximate estimate for this listing here at 1731 snapping circle, is going to be approximately 72 days on market. So now that this has been configured for this cell, we're just going to double click here at the bottom right hand side, and it's basically now going to auto calculate the remainder days on market for this entire column. Now I do want to verify that because sometimes it doesn't go through the entire column. Sometimes it cuts off, like you can see here, it just cut off at row 81. So we'll just manually drag this until all 500 rows have been completed. We have a little bit more than 500 rows, so it looks like we have 508. So now the days on market has been established, so we are good to go. And if we double click on any one of these cells, we can see here that the column F, row 1, which has the locked cell for today's date, did not move in the Excel formula. The only cell that moved dynamically was column E, row, well, in this case, it's row 438, but only column E is dynamically moved within the Excel formula. That's why we need to have the question mark, not the question mark, sorry, the dollar sign in front of the today's date. So this takes care of the days on market. So we're good to go here. Let's go back up on our spreadsheet. And let's now figure out what the estimated equity is on the property. Very important. So we have the loan 1 balance and we have the MLS amount. Now I want to make this look cleaner. So I'm going to insert 2 columns to the right hand side. And then I'm going to highlight column B. I'm going to drag column B to column C. I'm going to grab the MLS amount, which is in column I. I'm going to drag then that column into column B, and we're going to now insert a unique formula to calculate our equity. So we're going to put in equity here at the top, and it's going to be an estimated amount of equity, which is good enough for our subject to transactions. And so we're going to put in the Excel formula for the MLS amount minus the loan 1 balance, wrap this in the left and right hand parentheses, divide this by the MLS amount, click enter. Now immediately we are in the incorrect cell format, so we need to change this format from a currency format to a percentage format. And now we can see here that this particular property has 4.09 estimated equity on the property. So not a lot of equity and a huge opportunity for the wholesaler or the investor to really target specified properties that have a desirable equity percentage, have a conversation with that listing agent or seller, and see if they're willing to entertain a subject to offer. So we don't need to lock any of these cells here because this Excel formula here is going to be done for us dynamically. So we're going to click enter. I'm going to double click here on the right hand bottom of this cell. When I do that, the remainder estimated equity percentages will be auto calculated for us. Now we saw the same issue before for the days on market. What we're basically going to do here is just grab that bottom cell here and drag the Excel formula down until we've reached row 508. And when we do that, the remainder equity percentages will be listed. Now you'll see immediately that you have some pretty funky equity percentages here that say that the equity percentage is negative 8,000%. Don't be worried with that because this is, remember that when we did our pre-filtration in PropStream, remember how we had indicated to the MLS status of the listing that we wanted to look at properties that were active, but also properties that were for rent. And so when you see this negative equity percentage here, it is because that property is currently listed for rent. And so if you look here at column B, you can see here that 124 Auburn Run Lane is listed for rent at $2,300, which now makes sense to you as the viewer as to why the equity percentage is so great and it's trailing in the negative. But don't worry, this is just because the property is listed for rent. So when we start filtering our data set, we're going to first auto underwrite properties that are actively being sold. And then the properties that are for rent, we're going to target those last. So we want to prioritize our LOIs. We want to prioritize our email blast. Let's start targeting properties that are currently actively for sale. And then once the email blast has been completed, then we can come back into this data set. We can do an auto underwrite for these properties that are listed for rent, and then we can do an email blast on these properties and just increase our probability of the seller being open to a subject to a seller finance, a hybrid transaction, even a cash offer for their rented property. So all we're doing is we're going to do a follow-up with these properties that are listed for rent and just figure out if there's any motivation at all to sell that property as opposed to keep renting it out. So now that this equity here has been completed, the days on market has been completed, the last thing that we need to do here to clean up the data set is for the MLS agent name. When we do the email blast, we want to do an email blast according to the first name of that individual. So the first name in this case might be Natalia or Beverly or Mark. Well, in this case, Mark Spain is the brokerage. But we want to start sending these email blasts according to the first name of the individual and not their first and last name. So how do we get rid of the last name here from this column? Easy. We're going to insert two columns here to the right hand side. I'm going to now select column I. When I select column I, I'm going to go into the data tab. In the data tab, I'm going to select text to column. I'm going to click on next. Keep that first option there as a delimited. Keep that as delimited. Click on the next button. Your delimiter in this case, 99% of the time when you're exporting data from PropStream, your delimiter is going to be a space. Sometimes the delimiter is a comma. So it might say Daniel, comma, Parist, or it might say Daniel, period, Parist. But in our case, it's actually Daniel space Parist. That space is the delimiter. And so we are indicating to the text to column wizard here that the delimiter is indeed this 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 feature here. So now we're just going to click on next. We're going to keep the first column. The second column, we're going to say do not import. And the third column, we're going to say do not import. So the only one that's going to be imported is the first one. So we're going to keep this as general. Second column and third column, you need to select do not import. When you do that, you click finish. Sometimes it'll tell you that there's going to be some data here overridden, which is why we have inserted two columns here to the right hand side as a precautionary method that if there's any spilled data that's moving over to the right hand side of the column, that it is not going to affect our existing data, which in this case would have been the MLS agent phone number. So any of the spilled data now is here in these two empty columns and it is not affecting our primary data set. So now we have the agent or seller's first name. We can now safely delete these two columns. So you're going to select these two columns. You're going to click the delete button. Now everything here is good to go. It's completed. The only thing that I would want to do now is add some sort of conditional formatting. So for example, because we're starting to target properties that have very low equity for a subject to transaction, I want to put in a conditional formatting here on the equity column, which is going to be column D. So I'm going to start highlighting rows that are specified in a specific equity range. So go to the Home tab here on the Excel workbook, click on the conditional formatting, make sure you have selected your entire column, which in this case it's my column D, and we're going to highlight cells that are less than, let's start off with the less than negative 16% equity. Less than negative 16% equity is going to be a great indication that the property is actually listed for rent and it is not listed for sale. So I want this to be highlighted in red or really any color that you want. You have an option here on the drop down to select whatever color formatting that you choose. I'm going to choose red so that I am completely aware that when I see the red format, this property is listed for rent and it's not listed for sale. We're still going to do a follow-up with that agent or with that seller if they did this as a for sale by owner on the MLS. So we are going to keep this value here at negative 16% as our maximum cutoff. That way we are aware that we are working with rental properties and not for sale properties. So I'm going to click OK. Now let's go back into that same column. Let's click on the conditional formatting. Let's click on the between. And now I want to look at properties that are negative 15.9 percentage. Make sure you include the percentage symbol. And we're going to go all the way up to, let's say, 13%. And so what this is going to do is that it's going to indicate to us what our tier 1 subject to transactions are. Our tier 1 subject to transactions are going to be properties listed on the MLS that have such little equity that this might actually be a really great opportunity for the seller to consider a subject to transaction, knowing that they're going to have to write a check to closing for their negative equity or very little equity that they have on the property. So we're putting our cutoff here at the baseline at negative 15.9 and the maximum equity of 13%. We're going to put a green fill with dark green text as we know that this is going to be a positive property candidate for a subject to transaction. Now I'm going to click OK. Let's go back and select column D, select the conditional formatting. Let's click on the greater than, and our cutoff from last time was the 13%. So now we're going to do 13.1%, and we're going to go all the way up to 20%. So actually, I'm going to reverse this, and I'm going to make this a little bit more cleaner for everybody following along. Let's instead do the conditional formatting, and let's say between. So let's go to 13.1. Let's go up to 20%, or let's say 30%. We can go up to 30%, no issues with that. So it's going to be 13.1% to 30%, and we're going to put in a yellow fill with dark text. Now, what is this indicating here? This is indicating that the property is going to be a subject to transaction, but it is also going to be a seller finance transaction. There is not a great deal of equity on here, so this is going to be a good candidate for a hybrid acquisition, which is what the subject to and seller finance acquisitions are. It's a combination of both. So we're going to do subject to and seller finance for these properties, and we're going to have a cap at 30%. 30% estimated equity. So these properties that are going to be highlighted now in yellow are going to make good candidates for a hybrid acquisition. Now we're going to click OK, and now let's select column D one more time. Let's highlight the cells that are greater than 30.1%, and we're going to change this to a distinctive color. I think I'm going to choose the color blue. So we're going to come down here on the drop down, and we're going to click on the custom format. Let's go to the fill feature here and select any color that you want. I'm just going to choose blue. Maybe this blue here is sufficient. And when I basically do that, it's going to now highlight the cells that are greater than a 30.1% equity. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting it blue is because this property has so much equity that there's going to be a greater likelihood of that seller wanting to just have a full price offer for that listing, whether it's through a conventional method with another retail buyer, whether it's through cash. But the point is that they might not be so open-minded to a seller finance transaction. So we are going to highlight these as a blue, and I said seller finance, I meant to say hybrid transaction. They might not be so open-minded to a hybrid transaction because they do have so much equity and they just want to have that lien completely eliminated from their property. So we're going to highlight these cells that are greater than 30.1% equity as blue, just so that we are aware when we are looking at our data set that we're going to have selective tiers of properties that are going to be good candidates for a subject to, good candidates for a hybrid transaction, and then the ones that are highlighted here in blue, maybe these properties, instead of writing an LOI to that listing agent or seller, maybe you just send out an email campaign to these individuals and just ask them nicely if they have a property that they would be willing to entertain for, a generous cash offer, which might be anywhere between 70 or 80% of current market value, or maybe they would be open-minded to a creative finance offer. So we're going to click OK, and now we are ready to go. Now, the last filter here that I want to include here, which is going to be the very last one, is the MLS agent email. I want to make sure that I'm sending out LOIs to email addresses that are currently present on this dataset. I don't want to be wasting my time auto underwriting an LOI and then there's no agent email address associated with that property. So to make this look cleaner, we're going to click Control H on your keyboard. The find what feature here, we're going to leave it as blank. We're leaving this as blank because I want the workbook to look for blank cells within column K, and then I want the wizard here to format that blank cell as a yellow fill. And I want that done on purpose so that I can visually see which cells here have email addresses, which do not, and then I'll be able to filter out the data set as well to properties that already have a present email address. So now we're going to click on replace all. We see that we have a huge replacement list. That's simply because I had selected the entire column. If you want to make this even cleaner, you could just simply select the cells that you're working in, and then you would click Control H. But I had selected the entire column, which is completely fine for demonstration purposes. Now you'll see right now, nothing happened on the spreadsheet. But if I scroll over to the right-hand side, and I give the workbook maybe like 1 or 2 seconds to refresh itself, let's go back into the left-hand side, and we can now see that column K has been auto-populated with the yellow fill for the missing email addresses. So now we are ready to go. So what are we going to do? We're going to now add a filter here in row 1 from column A to column K. I'm going to go to the data tab here on the Excel workbook, click on the filter button, and let's start looking at properties from left to right based off of the filtration of low equity. So I'm going to click on the low equity here on column D, and I'm going to filter from smallest to largest. So the first row of data that I'm going to be seeing on my list is the rental properties, since that was the negative data set. Now I have the option to look at the days on market as well and maybe filter out the days on market from smallest to largest. I think I'm going to keep it the way it is for right now because I can see here that the days on market really isn't all that great. But what I will do is now from left to right hand side of the filter settings here, always filter your data set from left to right hand side, same way that you are solving a math problem. You're now going to select this filter here for the MLS agent email, and we're going to sort it by color. So when we sort it by color, now the email addresses that are going to be in the default color background of gray, these email addresses are going to be present at the top of the spreadsheet, and then the ones that are missing email addresses, which we can fill in later at any point in time, those are going to be at the bottom of our spreadsheet. So I'm going to sort it now by gray. So now we have a nice clean spreadsheet that now we can start doing an auto underwrite for our properties. So now we are done with the conditional formatting and with the filtration method. Since we're going to be focused on our subject to auto underwrites and email blast, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start targeting these properties here that are highlighted in green. So it looks like I have about 38 properties here that would make a good candidates for subject to, and these are active listings. Looks like I got another 3 here that are contingent. I have another 9 here that are pending. Looks like we have a few here that are active and pending. A few more here that are active, but these are missing email addresses, so these might actually be properties that I might want to manually find out who that listing agent is because it's currently active. Days on market is not so much, and they have relatively low interest, relatively low equity on these properties, so I know it's going to make a great candidate for subject to. We just need to find the MLS agent email for these properties. And let's see, this one here is contingent. This one here is pending. So we have our data set here. Now, of course, if you're using a data set from PropStream, Batchleys, or whatever third-party service provider that you use, your data set quality is going to determine how well this is going to look for you. PropStream does a fairly good job, I'd say about 75 to 80% of the time, of giving you very accurate data. So it's not going to be perfect, but because we're going to be doing an auto underwrite and email blast on a large volume of properties within just a few hours each day, then the quality of the data is not going to be as important as the volume that we're able to generate within a short period of time. So now let's start taking these property addresses that we are interested in doing the auto underwrite for. So I'm going to start here. So let's go to row 30. Let's go down to row 67. I'm going to click Control C on my keyboard. I'm going to scroll up to this spreadsheet here, and I'm going to go into the first available row, which is row 13. That was the property address. So now I'm going to right click and I'm going to click on value here within column E of the property address. So now these are going to be the property addresses that I want to start targeting. So now we need the MLS amount. So let's take that and let's click Control on our keyboard, Control C. That was the MLS amount. So we're going to paste that here in column G of the auto underwrite spreadsheet. And now we need to grab the mortgage amount, which is going to be the loan one balance. So let's do that. Let's click Control C. Let's right click on our mouse and click on the value selector here. So now we can see here that the subject to category has already been auto populated for us from the auto underwrite. So we are confident that we are working with a subject to transaction. So now what do we need? Now we need the days on market because the seller is going to receive a cash offer from us. And the cash offer is more to give a reflection to the seller of what a conventional offer would look like. The cash offer is more than likely not going to be accepted by the seller, but we want to have a compare contrast baseline between a subject to create a finance transaction and a cash offer. So the days on market, we're going to paste that here in column B. So this is going to be our days on market. The cash offer is going to be based off of the days on market that the listing is currently up and running. We need the MLS agent name. So let's do that. Let's click on Control C on our keyboard. Let's paste that here on that spreadsheet. Lastly, we need the email address. I'll click Control C and then we'll paste in these email addresses. The telephone number is optional. If you want to fill in this column here with the agent's telephone number, you can. We need to select the state that we're working in. We are working in the state of Georgia. So I already know that this is something that I need. So let's put in our state, Georgia, and we're going to take this, drag it, and now we have this filled in for these properties. Now the column I for the P&I monthly, this is the principal and interest payment. We don't need this for the auto underwrite because this is only going to be for the hybrid transactions. This column here is for hybrid transactions. The tax assessed value, this is going to be needed for the hybrid and seller finance transactions. The rental value, this is also going to be needed for the hybrid and seller finance transactions. But when we're doing our subject to transactions for the auto underwrite, super simple. So we have all the data necessary right now for the Jericho software to start creating our LOIs. Now I want to add a couple more properties to this data set here. So I'm actually going to go back into the leads import and I'll just fast forward this video here and I'll fill in some missing properties here that I really do want to create an auto underwrite for, and then we'll move forward from there. Okay, so now we're ready to move forward. I filled in a little bit more of this data set here. So we're going to have a total of 53 properties here for subject to transactions. The seller and the listing agent is going to receive both a cash and subject to offer we're going to use the auto underwrite now here within the Jericho, and we're going to create these LOIs within probably like 2 minutes. So within 2 minutes, we're going to have 53 properties that have been completely auto underwritten for us on a presentable and certified LOI that's then going to get automatically attached to the email recipient, whether it's the agent or the seller. Let's go over here to the settings here on the right hand side. You'll see a couple settings here for the subject to, and the really the only three that you need to focus in on for the subject to is the conventional sale fee, the creative sales fee, and the cash percentage for the subject to offer. If you're doing a fix and flip and you're targeting a list from PropStream, and the PropStream list that you have gathered, is a very distressed property, and you want to give a cash offer that is well below market value, because you tend to flip that property, then there's a setting here that will tell you that you can indicate that you are doing a flip, and then you'll have your own designated cash offer for that flip. So this cash offer will be based off of the days on market. And the greater number of days on market, the lower market value that property is going to have. And so then your cash offer is going to be based off of that current market value for that fix and flip property. Now, we are not going to do any type of fix and flip properties at this moment in time, as we are strictly focused in on the subject to acquisitions. So for the conventional sales fee, we're going to leave that at 4%. Why? Because we're assuming the listing agent is going to receive 3% for agent commission and then 1% generally for closing costs on the seller side. Now, the creative sales fee, the 3% listing percentage still stays, but generally speaking, the closing cost is going to be a little bit cheaper for the creative finance transaction. So that's why it's only going to be about 0.8% for the closing cost. Now, the percentages here are going to be based off of the closing sales price of the property, which in this case is going to be the purchase price of the property. So whatever the purchase price is of the property, these sales fees are going to be based off of that purchase price. And so we don't really need to focus in so much on these numerical values. Just be aware that that is how the mathematics is working. And so the cash percentage for this subject to offer, this one is important. This one we're putting in a baseline comparison for the seller to understand that if they take a conventional offer at cash or through some sort of retail method, more than likely they're not going to net so much money at closing. So we need to have that distinctive difference, and we need to visualize that for the seller. Now, generally speaking, if you receive a cash offer at 90% of the current market value of that property and you are not in a low equity situation, you should 100% take that money and run, because 90% at current market value for cash is an amazing cash offer. But for subject to transactions, it is not desirable because the seller is still going to have to cut a check at closing, which is why we are making that distinctive difference to the seller. Even if you get a 90% cash offer of current market value, you still need to write a check to closing. And so we can have a cash offer that is significantly higher than most investors are willing to offer to any seller, because we know that the seller is more than likely not going to accept it either way. And so we really want to incentivize the seller and give them the option that there is another method here to close on that property, and it is through a subject to acquisition, a subject to sale. And so if you are open-minded to this concept of a subject to sale, then we can give you more money for that property at closing. But the only way that the seller is going to consider that information is if you give that visual comparison between a cash and a subject to transaction. So that is why the cash offer is always going to be present on our LOIs. Now, the remainder settings here are going to be based off of seller finance and hybrid acquisitions. We can do a separate lesson on that after this lesson here is completed. For right now, all we need to do is auto create our subject to LOIs. And the moment that these LOIs are created, we're pretty much about 5 minutes away from doing an email blast. And you'll see how quick that is as well. So we have our listed properties here. The only thing that we need to be mindful of within the Jericho software is that we need to click on our subject to tab here. Make sure that the payment structure and graph for the source is under the auto input. This is basically telling the software running in the background that this LOI here is going to auto update itself based off of the auto underwrite here. And so if you leave the subject to tab here where the LOI is being housed and you have it under the manual input, what's basically going to happen is that these values here will not change on the LOI template because these values here are coming off of the cash versus creative tab, which is going to be used mainly for manual underwriting. If you just need to do some really quick underwriting and then just send an email quickly to the seller agent, you would just use this tab here to do the mathematics quickly. So the subject to tab here, we're going to leave that as the auto input because we're doing the auto underwrite. So now I'm going to put up my folder file path. My folder file path is actually somewhere here on my secondary screen. So we have 53 subject to LOIs that we are going to create, 53. And the moment that I click on this macro here is the moment that you'll start to see that these LOIs are created for us. And now we can see that our subject to LOIs are going to be created. Now I have the video recording here running in the background. It normally takes about 1 minute to do 50 LOIs. Doesn't matter if it's subject to seller finance or hybrid acquisitions. Because I have the video recording running in the background, I think this is going to take maybe about 1.5 minutes or a little bit longer, just because I'm utilizing more resources on my PC. But this runs extremely quick. And so you can see here that we have the property address here. We're creating an LOI here, which is going to be in a PDF format. And then our subject to information for both cash and the subject to acquisitions is going to be inserted and auto underwritten for us automatically on this LOI. So once this is completed, then what we're going to do is we're going to go into our master tab and blast emails, and we're going to certify these LOIs. So you'll see that in just a second. That will be super quick, probably about 1 minute or so. And then we'll be ready to do an email blast. So this entire step-by-step process is a little bit lengthier than normal just because I really want you to understand how the process is. And I'm trying to give you as much information as possible so that you feel comfortable enough to do this on your own. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me directly or even ask questions within the community group. So it looks like we're done here. So subject to LOI is completed. I'm going to click OK. Let's pull up one of these LOIs just to confirm it. But we should be good to go. Let's maximize the LOI. And here we go. So we have our subject to LOI for both cash and creative finance ready to go to be presented to both the seller or to the agent. So this is for property address 147 on Andrea Way. Let's take a screenshot of this if you want now, and I'll minimize this. And then what I'll do is I'll click on a random property address. This one here happens to be called Juniper Lane. Very interesting property address, 20 Juniper Lane. Let's click on that one, and then we can compare numerical values. So we can already see that the auto underwriting is being done for us. So this one here says that the payment to the seller is going to be $33,722. This one here is going to be $25,550. This is a non-refundable payment that the seller is going to receive from us from a subject to transaction. And we're writing that distinctively because this wholesaler or even the investor, you can't get that money back. Once the property closes at close of escrow, the money that is wired in, and once that property closes, it is non-refundable. And we want to make that very clear to the seller because they're not used to doing any type of creative finance transactions. So we want to make it clear that we're going to pay you the equity up front, and this is going to be your equity that you're going to receive through a check, a wire, a deposit, however it is that you want to collect that cash, but this is your equity, and we're just simply writing a check to you at closing for the equity that you do have on your property. You can see here that these LOIs are completely distinctive and unique. So we're ready to go. We don't need to do anything else. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to certify these LOIs. So let's minimize this. The auto underwrite here for the subject to is finished. Let's go to the master tab in the blast emails. And now we're going to click on this macro here. It says convert to certified LOI. So when I click on this macro, it's basically going to change those PDF documents that you saw previously. and it's going to certify it in a PDF A1B format, which is the highest security standard for any type of documents that are being attached via email. So those certified LOIs now are going to be dropped in this folder path here. So my screen is going to have various black prompts appear the moment that I press on this macro. So viewer, be warned, it is not your PC, it is my own PC. And this is done using the Jericho software, where we are now going to certify these LOIs for the seller or agent. So let's get that started. I'm going to click on the certification process now. You'll see a numerous amount of black prompts appear. Give this about maybe 1 minute or so, maybe even less than a minute. And the moment that these black prompts disappear, our certification process will have completed. And once the certification process completes, I will pull up one of these LOIs for visualization purposes. Okay, so it looks like we're good to go here. So it looks like all the PDF files have been successfully converted to the PDF A1B format. So now let's pull up the folder file path, and we can see here that we are indeed in the certified LOI section, and these property addresses do have indeed the file name text as certified. So if I click on any of these, you'll see here immediately that it says the file claims compliance with the PDF A standard and has been opened read-only to prevent modification. So this is beautiful. This is what we want. Now we're going to click on the right-hand side from Adobe. It's not necessary, but if you want to just verify the conformance of the file, this is what you would do. You would simply click on this section here that says verify conformance. Again, not necessary, but for visualization purposes, I want you to see that it is indeed in the correct format. So you can see here now that this LOI is indeed certified according to Adobe Acrobat. Now this is being done automatically for you and for free using the Jericho software. Normally this costs you about $30 a month through the Adobe Acrobat Pro, but we are bypassing all of that and we're letting the Jericho software certify it for us according to the standards set by Adobe Acrobat Pro. So we're good to go here. So we'll close out of this. We'll minimize out of here as well. The last thing that we need to do is we are going to copy and paste the agent seller's name, the email address, and the property address that we are going to start sending out these emails to. So let's do that. Let's go back into the auto underwrite. Let's copy and paste the agent or seller's name. So we have 53 cells selected. I'm going to click Control on my keyboard and I'm going to hold it. And when I do so, I'm going to then select the agent or seller's email address here. I'm not going to let go of the keyboard shortcut named Control. I'm going to still keep that locked in. And then I'm going to then select the property address. And I'm doing this on purpose just so then I don't have to go back into the auto underwrite tab 3 times. We can simply select the desired cells that we need to select one time. Click on Control C on your keyboard. It'll copy everything, go into the master tab, and now right click on the first cell here in row 26, select value as the pasting option. So now the only thing that we need to move is this data here, which happens to be under the telephone column. We're simply going to drag this information over to the property address. And when we do that, we can see here that some of the cells here have lost their color. Totally fine. You can just fill this in on your own. I'm going to change this back to the default gray with the border lines filled in. And there we go. Now it looks nice and clean. So we have the agent and seller's name, their email address, and the property address. So we're probably about 2 minutes away from doing an email blast. But before we do an email blast, what we're going to do is we're going to verify that the body text that we want to include within the email is according to our liking. So this is going to be your drop-down selection for the body text. And you're simply going to come over here to the yellow box, which is in column B, row 19. There is a drop-down arrow here. Anything that is filled in within the rows here, row 20 through row 24, this selection of text will be present in this drop down arrow here in column B, row 19. So whatever you fill in column A, row 20 through row 24 will be automatically present for you in this drop down. It'll be present for you, but if you make any changes here in column A for the body text, just be sure that you are refreshing this information within the yellow box. So what I mean by it is today's recording happens to be on a Wednesday. So this happens to be saying that hope your Tuesday morning is off to a good start. You can see the entire text here at the very top of the Excel formula bar. If I were to update this to Wednesday and I click on enter, it'll auto-populate here, of course, but then you have to come down here to the drop-down selection of the yellow box, and you have to now select the updated body text, which happens to be the one that we just created. So that's the only thing that you need to do. Is just a reminder. I even left a little footnote here for you, just so that you are aware that you need to click on this drop-down anytime there's any changes made here. So I'm going to now pick the body text that I want. I'm going to pause the video real quick and then we'll come back. Alright, so before you do your email blast campaign, make sure you are selecting which email blaster you want to be using. So I'm going to be using the Microsoft Outlook method. You're more than welcome to use your SMTP connections with any type of licensed third-party provider, such as maybe MailChimp, for example, or I think even GoDaddy might do something similar to this as well, where you can basically send out 10,000 offers in a day. Now, because we're just doing a very small email blast here of about 50 offers here, this is all going to be done probably within about an hour. And we're just going to use the email method here using Microsoft Outlook. But you have a drop down here, should you choose. You can connect with your SMTP service provider, and then you would simply enter the credentials that are needed so that you can use their services when sending out an LOI campaign. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to verify the body text is to my liking before I do an email blast. So I'm on row 78 right now, and I'm basically going to pull up row 78, which is my starting row. I'm going to display that email to true because I want to see it visually before it gets sent out manually. And I'm going to keep the attach a letter of intent to true as well. The greeting, it is happened to be about 2 p.m. right now as of the recording of this video, so I have changed the greeting over to good afternoon. You'll definitely need to select this drop down depending on the time of day before you do any type of email LOI campaign. The EMD and due diligence period is also being included in the email. If you're doing a standard email campaign with no LOIs attached, you'll set this to no. If you want to change the subject line of the email, you simply fill out this text here within the yellow box, and you will then change the subject line. The EMD and due diligence period is also changeable for the massive email campaign that we're going to do right now. I have it set as a default for $3,000 for EMD and 7 days due diligence excluding Sundays. So those are my default standards. Now I want to look at the LOI email before it gets sent out. So I'm going to set the display to true. I'm going to click on the blast email. You'll get a progress bar here letting you know where it is in terms of sending out that LOI email. It was relatively fast. And I'm going to take a look at this and make sure that everything's to my liking. Whoops, it looks like it disappeared on me real quick. But it looks like everything's good to go. This is going to be my standard LOI email that I send out to agents. This is real time, by the way, so I'm sending out 53 LOIs at this moment as of the recording of this video. These are all subject to properties, so I mean, this is a fantastic list right here. Huge probability that these agents or sellers are going to be very interested in the subject to offer, which means it's going to be a very easy property, should you choose, to assign to an investor. This is a great way to make a large amount of cash in a short period of time. If you send out 100 offers each day, you're going to have probably about 2,000 offers in a month. And if you do the math, and each offer has a 1% chance of actually closing at the close of escrow, but you're making 10K from each property that is closed, you're going to make a substantial amount of cash within the next 30 days of doing an LOI campaign through the Jericho software. So if you're interested in the Jericho software, or if you're interested in my community, the link is in the video description below for you to check it out. And let's continue on with today's lesson. I like everything here within the LOI template that I'm seeing. I don't think there's anything in here that I would want to change. I've got my LOI certified LOI already attached automatically, which is fantastic. So everything looks good on my end. I think we're ready to go with the email blast. So I'll minimize out of here, close out of this Outlook email, and now I'm going to change the starting row to row 13, or actually it's row 26. Row 26 is my starting row as indicated here on this spreadsheet. So we're going to change the starting row to row 26. We're going to change the display email to false. We're going to say attach the letter of intent, yes. And then very important, we're going to put in a time interval between every minute to every minute and a half. A new LOI is going to be sent out. So within the next hour, we'll have 53 LOIs that are sent out automatically for us. We won't have to lay a finger. We're not going to do a massive email blast within seconds of each LOI email that is sent. We want to have a break between each LOI email that is sent out because this needs to be human-like behavior and not an automation method. So that is why we have a time interval break between each email sent. But regardless, you're sending out 50 to 60 offers every hour is amazing. In 2 hours and a half maximum, you would have sent out 120 offers during that day, but you really only need probably about 20 or 30 minutes maximum to do the lead analysis, to filter it, to auto underwrite. And then the moment we click on the blast email feature, you're done. You can just sit back and do nothing. Just answer phone calls as they come in from the agent or from the seller. So within 20 or 30 minutes, you would have 100 plus offers created. And then for the next 2 hours, this is basically going to be on autopilot mode and be sending out an LOI to that recipient on your behalf. So we're pretty much done here. Row 26 is going to be our starting row. Bob for property address 83 Summit Ridge Circle is going to get an LOI from us first. The display email is sent to false. The attached LOI is sent to true. I'm going to clear the content here for the status just so that everything's nice and clean. And we're good. I'm just going to now blast the LOI email, and the moment that I click on this button, you're going to see the progress bar, and that progress bar is basically going to indicate that we are sending out LOI number 1 of 53. And then every minute or every minute and a half, that progress bar will then move on forward and it'll say 3 of 53 emails sent out or 25 of 53 emails sent out. So you'll see that in just a sec, but we're good to go here. Enough talking. I'm going to click on the blast LOI email and we are set in stone. So now I don't have to do anything else. What I could do if I wanted is go back into the leads import, and under the leads import tab, we can basically, I'm going to move this progress bar here onto my secondary screen, is go back into the leads import here, and under the leads import, all of the missing email addresses that were missing, we can fill that out while the email blast is working in the background. So while this is working in the background, we can come into this data set. We can continue to analyze our data set, or we can just filter out data that we really don't want to be working with on the next go around. We can fill in the missing email addresses that we want to target for specified properties, or you can go back into PropStream batch leads and grab a new list of data. So we can see here now the progress bar had changed and it had auto-populated. Now we're sending email 2 of 53. So this is the Jericho software. This is a full step-by-step breakdown of the automation that takes place between the lead generation, the lead analysis, the auto underwrite, and the email blast, all for our cash and subject to transactions. So within the next lesson here that we cover, we'll go over the hybrid and the seller's finance transactions. It'll also be a step-by-step tutorial using the Jericho software. Thank you for watching this. If you have any specific questions, leave a comment in the video below. Join the community and you'll have full access to the Jericho software. Thank you very much and take care.